act of God.
The ocean surface literally rises. It was almost certain death.
Hey fellas, dinner's at 6.
In the summer of 1935, 700 men, most of them World War I veterans, swelter in the brutal Florida sun. Their mission? Build a highway connecting the Florida Keys. The project is one of President Roosevelt's New Deal efforts to jumpstart the economy by putting the down and out on the federal payroll.
And these are the guys who won a war. Now it's 1935, everything's fallen apart. And they were very skinny because they were broke and they had been wandering, and a lot of them had lost their houses and their farms, and they were desperate.
One of those in charge is a fellow veteran who knows firsthand the danger of living where two seas come together. He is determined not to replay the past. His own bosses will prove fatally less prudent. On September 2nd, Labor Day, these battle-scarred veterans will face an unnamed killer when the most powerful hurricane in the nation's history pummels the Florida Keys. With winds up to 200 miles an hour and a 17-foot wave of water and destruction. Its devastation inspires one of America's most famous authors to berate the government for its lack of foresight. And the Labor Day hurricane will become one of only 3 Category 5 hurricanes to ever hit the U.S. The storm against which all others are measured.
This, in a way, was almost a hurricane that did seem to reflect the times. It was a time when so many forces, economic, natural, and political forces, seemed to be ganging up to hurt the people who were least able, least capable of protecting themselves.
One of the men supervising the camps will be a fellow veteran, Ed Sheeran, who has worked here for nearly 30 years. He knows the tranquility of these islands can be deceptive. He's well aware of the potential for hurricanes. From his office in Jacksonville, he writes to the Florida Railroad. He requests that a rescue train be put on standby in Miami, ready to make the 5-hour trip to the Keys to evacuate the vets. With this, Fred Ghent considers the problem solved. He is wrong.
He didn't really seem to, to quite have a grasp of what was needed to get the train down there, and it was a problem that just ended up bedeviling them.
In fact, the railroad will need 12 hours to put together a train and get it to the camps after officials request an evacuation. When hurricane winds strike, 12 hours can be an eternity. With this official warning, Ray Sheldon finally feels he has enough information to justify evacuating the veterans. His rescue plan hangs on the belief that a train is waiting in Miami, ready to make the 5-hour trip to take the vets to safety.
We have to get the women out right away.
But first, Ray Sheldon has to call his boss, Fred Ghent, who's 500 miles away, and the only one who can authorize the train.
Fred Ghent was away up in Jacksonville, and telephone service, which is not like it is today. They had to leave messages for him at the hotel office.
He was incredibly difficult to get a hold of. They had to call around to the restaurants that he went to. They called his office. He wasn't there. They finally got him, I think, off the golf course.
Yes, operator.
At 2 p.m., 4 hours after Sheldon's initial call, Fred Gent sends a wire to the East Coast Railroad office in Miami and orders the evacuation.
Need to evacuate men?
But Gent has also made the tragic assumption that the railroad will have a train ready to go.
Stop. Signed, Fred Gent.
These were not diesel locomotives that are ready to go the moment you fire them up. To get a steam locomotive ready to go, you've got to get the fire going. You've got to get the steam built up.
To make matters worse, most railroad crewmen are off for the Labor Day holiday. While railroad supervisors scramble in Miami, the hurricane picks up speed.
We gotta get to the Keys, there's a hurricane coming.
Energized by the 80-degree waters, it races directly toward the Keys. It is now a Category 5 behemoth, with gusting wind speeds approaching 200 miles an hour. At 4:45 p.m., the rescue train finally leaves the station in Miami. It has taken 2 hours for a skeleton crew to assemble the cars and build up steam for the 80-mile trip to the camps. It is now nearly 5 hours since Ray Sheldon first called for a train.
And this is when conditions really deteriorated dramatically. The edges of the storm's worst winds started approaching the Keys.
Finally, at 8:20 p.m., they see the headlight of the rescue train piercing the rain and darkness. One of those waiting at the station is Ray Sheldon, the camp safety director who hesitated to order the train.
The plan was to stop at the station, pick up Ray Sheldon, and Sheldon would help them direct how the veterans were to be loaded onto the train.
Sheldon is now a victim of a storm he has badly underestimated. For 15 minutes, the crew scrambles to collect the men, women, and children. As they board the train, they find relief from nature's fury. But that respite is temporary. Out at sea, the deadly storm surge is building.
The wave of water that the hurricane pushes in front of it reaches 18 feet tall. Okay, that's 3 men on top of one another.
You may have 5 or 10 foot waves on top of that. That's extremely destructive.
The spinning center of the hurricane shoves tons of surging water toward shore, directly toward the rescue train and those passengers now trapped inside.
They're going into an area where the winds are getting stronger and stronger. The rain is beating down on them. Remember that this is just a small, narrow railway anyway. They had to be thinking to themselves, this is not a good situation to be in.
As that storm tide approaches the Keys, it lifts up. Within a matter of minutes, the ocean surface literally rises.
The locomotive pushes forward and suddenly is brought to a grinding halt.
What had happened, the winds had blown a boxcars at the rear of the train off the tracks.
While veterans and crew try to upright it, water surrounds the entire train. It's paralyzed on the tracks. It's at this moment that the peak of the storm surge arrives.
You're talking about water that's basically going to sweep over and carry away or destroy anything in its path.
Passenger cars weighing as much as 100 tons were just simply shoved off the track. just like a fire hose turned on a kid's toy train.
Inside, passengers struggled to keep their heads above water, desperately trying to hold their children high enough for them to breathe. The remaining train cars are scattered across the landscape in a 150-foot wide arc. The men who checked on the boxcar are now trapped outside, clinging to the train's tender car as the waters churn around them. Their screams can barely be heard over the roar of the wind. By now, the storm has been hammering the Keys for nearly 6 hours, and the worst is yet to come. On September 2nd, 1935, the most powerful hurricane in U.S. history pounds the Florida Keys. On Upper Matecumbe Key, the 17-foot storm surge has blown a rescue train off the tracks. Just when they thought they had found safety, dozens of men, women, and children are overcome by the raging ocean. Only the train's engine remains upright as the violent Atlantic washes over the Keys. September 1935. The most powerful hurricane in U.S. history has shattered parts of the Florida Keys. Early newsreel footage shows train cars littered across the landscape. Every passenger inside survived the 17-foot storm surge. Amazingly, others survived by clinging to the train's heavy engine. Today, there are few reminders in the Keys of the storm's savagery. Only a handful of locals are left to tell the tale firsthand. Nearly all of the veterans lucky enough to have survived the 1935 hurricane have since died.
This was a story about humans versus nature, and I think also about the inevitability of who's going to win that kind of fight.
You had this incredible hurricane that developed, and sort of a lackadaisical government not taking care of the people who were down there. And it just seemed like everything conspired against these men.
This hurricane just sort of blew away their sort of end-of-the-line, last-ditch effort to try to ride out not only the storm of the century, but the storm of the Depression as well.